What's up, everyone? Well, I've had this juniper raft on this slab stone for probably 15 years now. And today I'm going to go in and do a little bit of a refresh on the soil that's in here because I've noticed that the growth on the tree slowed down last season. So the first thing I need to do basically is just kind of clear out some space here because basically what I want to do is I want to remove some of the dense soil that's in here and replace it with fresh soil, just like you would do in a standard repot, except in this case the container, rather than having a hard wall like a ceramic container, is basically just muck, which is a mixture of sphagnum moss and clay and akadama in this case. It's just a mixture of those components, and then I've put moss over it in the past multiple times, but as the tree grows, it populates pretty much all of the space that's available in the container. And so in order to refresh the soil, because you don't want to actually remove the tree from the stone and reattach it, it's actually attached using some wires that have been on there for a very long time, and the wires were basically cemented to the stone. And so I could take it off and I could do kind of a more traditional repot, or I could take it off and put it into a pot for a season to give it a little bit more room to grow for a little while. But I'm going to see if I can get it going again just by first removing all of the surface moss here, which I may try to reuse later. So as you can see, the outside of this is relatively dense, and there's a mixture of kind of clay and sphagnum moss in here. And then inside that is actually regular bonsai soil. But if I just go around and scrape off the outside here, I won't really be refreshing it enough. So I'm actually going to get in here, not necessarily right here, but in places in the root ball, and do a little bit more aggressive root work in terms of removing the existing soil and replacing it. I think because this has been on here for so long, as I go around here, I notice different sections where in some places I've added sphagnum moss, which was a technique that I've used more recently. And in other cases, there's sort of more bricky kind of material here that is the old muck wall, maybe from when it was originally built, or many years ago when I created muck in order to refresh parts of the wall. And what I'm noticing overall, which is exactly what I expected, is that there's just not a lot of kind of free space in here for the roots to continue growing. And so in order to kind of really get this plant growing again, I'm going to need to be a little bit more aggressive than maybe I have been the last couple of times in terms of replacing soil. Now that I've made a huge mess, I'm going to use a vacuum cleaner to get some of this out of here. All right, I've attacked the perimeter, and now I'm going to get in here and empty out a couple of sections and just see what the things look like, remove some of the bigger crossing roots, and just make some space for the tree to start growing again. Looks like the tie wires broke off. All right, well, since I have the opportunity to essentially redo this, I am going to take that as an opportunity. I wasn't really planning on removing it from the stone and either reattaching it or putting it on something else. But now that it's detached, I'm going to take a look. One of the things I've been noticing as I get a little bit older is that it's not as easy to carry this rock as it used to be. All right, well, as a consequence of this thing getting weak, it's a raft, and this part of the raft just wasn't doing well. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it because it's not really adding anything, and I don't think it would work well as a gin. Well, despite all of this work, the core of the root ball as well as the bottom are still very much intact. So I think since it's disconnected from the stone, I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom mat of roots just like I would if it was in a pot and I was repotting it back into the same pot. I've got the root ball all reduced and put it back on the slab here. And so now what I need to start thinking about is how to keep it secure and what I'm going to use to build the wall around here. Now, when this was originally built, I used a muck mixture, and I think I'm going to use a combination, a little bit of muck in some places and then just sphagnum moss and akadama in other places. All right, well, I'm glad that worked because I wasn't 100% sure, but basically, just to summarize what I was doing, I used a masonry bit that was just about the same size as these stainless steel number 10 1-inch long screws and drilled a hole in the rock. Now, obviously, there's some danger in doing that in that you can split the rock like I could just break off this whole piece of the rock. But I've had this stone for quite a while, and I knew it was pretty tough because I've never chipped any pieces off of it. So I went ahead and gave it a try, and ultimately this is going to be a much better long-term fastening system than just using some epoxy or what I used last time, which was a mix of cement and super glue. And so I've got these stainless steel screws attached here. All I need to do now is just wrap a few pieces of aluminum wire around them in order to use for the anchor points, and then I can start preparing the slab to receive the tree again. So this rock doesn't really have any places on it where it's going to pool water. It's at the orientation that it sits on the bench out in the garden, and it has a couple of like felt dots on the bottom of it to kind of even it out so that it doesn't wobble. I'm going to use a little bit of my muck mixture. My muck mixture has a lot of sphagnum moss in it, a lot more than I used to use. So basically all I'm doing here is making a low wall to keep the soil from rolling off the edge of the slab. And then I'm going to put a shallow layer of soil over the stone before I put the tree back on. One of the things that for the last few years has been bothering me about this is that I feel like the tree, even though you can see it from the side, the tree is obviously coming far forward. I felt like it was tilted this way a little bit, and so I've added a little bit of extra soil to the front of this. The bottom of the root ball is well conformed to the shape of the stone, obviously, even though I took off the outer layer or the bottom layer of fine roots, there's still that same shape there. And so by adding a little bit, just an extra kind of grain height of that soil to the front, I think I've managed to change the angle a little bit, but I'm going to stand back and double check. All right, with 3 tie points in, that's going to keep the tree from moving around. And so now I'm going to start by adding a little bit of extra soil around the edges here and make sure that any of these spaces are filled up with soil prior to starting to build the wall that will kind of form the contour of the planting. Now, ever since I did this the first time, I've always been kind of unhappy with how large the root ball was compared to the stone. It was kind of a little bit too tall. So this time I'm going to plan on keeping the wall a little bit lower and have it taper down much more gradually. And I think the maturity of the tree and the amount of root work that I've done here is going to make it so that that will be successful. I've got some shredded sphagnum moss that I've added a little bit of water to, but it's not sopping wet in the bottom here. And then this is the moss that I took off the planting when I started. And whenever I put moss onto this planting in particular, and in a lot of places, over time, some of the moss seems to colonize certain areas and some of the moss seems to colonize other areas depending on how sunny it is or shady. So I'm going to take some of the better looking moss like this, and I'm going to shred it up, and I'm going to mix it with some of this other moss so that as it starts to grow again, as it's getting watered, that the moss naturally populates the area. All ground up and ready to go. Well, hopefully that will reset this and get it growing again really nicely like it was for the first few years it was on the slab. It was a little bit more work than I was expecting just because I had to reestablish the tree onto the slab. I thought it would stay there based on the fact that the the old ties were super glue and cement. If you I tried to look that up on the internet one time and it doesn't work, but suffice to say, if you mix a fine cement with a very liquid super glue, it makes this very hard substance that's bonds really quickly. So that's what was used, and I guess over the course of 10 years that broke down. Either that or I'm misremembering what happened 10 years ago. So in any case, I've added the shredded sphagnum and moss to form the top layer of the wall. And over time, as this is watered, the moss that's on here that's live will populate the rest of the surface. At least that's the idea. I want to give a big shout out to Ryan Neal, who popularized this technique in the United States. And if you haven't checked out Mirai Live, and this is not a paid advertisement, if you haven't checked out Mirai Live, I suggest you, if you're a serious bonsai enthusiast, that you do so. It's a lot of really good content. I hope you enjoyed that. If you've done some rock plantings recently and want to share your experiences with the process of keeping the roots in check and making sure that the tree is healthy, put it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time.